Let me say this carefully because it needs to be heard, not skimmed the way I once did. I was not raised believing in Jesus. I did not drift into darkness by chance. I chose it, studied it, and lived in it for many years. I was a Satanist trained to observe human behavior, to recognize points of access, and to take advantage of moments most believers consider harmless. There was one moment in particular that always brought laughter on the other side. One small action that opened doors people never intended to open. That moment was yawning during prayer. I know how it sounds. I would have laughed at it too when I was still living that life. What I am about to share did not come from superstition or folklore. It came from structured instruction, from rituals, and from repeated observation in places where the name of Jesus was never honored, only ridiculed. Life on the other side, observing believers. When I later gave my life to Christ, this truth stayed with me like a caution I could not dismiss. Prayer is not empty speech. It is an interaction with the spiritual environment. The moment destruction, passivity, or spiritual weariness enters through the mouth, a shift occurs that many believers have never been taught to protect against. I remember the first time it was pointed out to me. I was told when they yawn, they are not tired, they are open. I am not here to frighten you. I am here because I was once tasked with observing believers, not launching direct attacks, but waiting for small lapses, for moments of carelessness disguised as ordinary behavior. Prayer was always the focus, not because it lacked strength, but because it carried power. If you have ever noticed prayers feeling disrupted, heavy, or suddenly unfocused, or if you have sensed an unusual loss of concentration while speaking to God, stay with me. What I am about to share comes from a place I narrowly escaped, and I am speaking now because silence is what allows these things to continue. In the circles I was part of, prayer was never seen as symbolic or harmless. It was treated as a transmission, a signal, prayer a spiritual engagement, not routine that disrupted activity in the unseen realm. That is why the aim was rarely to stop prayer completely. That approach was too direct and too noticeable. The focus was always on interference, distortion, and confusion. If a believer prayed while distracted, present in body, but unfocused in spirit, it was counted as success. I remember being in rooms where Christian patterns were analyzed with precision, much like routines studied in strategic planning. Morning prayers, nighttime prayers, prayers in church, prayers during fasting. Attention was always given to physical states such as tiredness, hunger, and emotional strain. Because the connection between the body and the spirit is far deeper than most people are taught to recognize. When the body disengages, the spirit often follows. Yawning was one of those moments that got special aid. Not because yawning itself is sinful, but because of what it represents spiritually. Yawning is a moment of surrender. The jaw drops, the breath deepens, awareness dulls for a split second. In occult language, it was called a micro. Why distraction weakens prayer focus, vacancy. Opposing conscious authority and prayer, which should be an act of spiritual authority, suddenly becomes passive if the believer doesn't guard it. Iowa, people pray with sincerity but without alertness. Their words were right, but their posture was wrong. Their spirit was speaking, but their awareness drifted. And in those moments, the atmosphere shifted, not dramatically, not like in horror movies, quietly, subtly, almost politely. That's the part people don't understand. Darkness doesn't always crash in. Sometimes it slips in through habits. And oh, one questions. This is the part I wrestled with the most after I got saved, because I didn't want to sound extreme. But truth doesn't stop being true just because it makes people uncomfortable. In old training, the mouth was always considered a gate. Words create, breath carries intention. Sound moves authority. That's why chants, incantations, and verbal agreements mattered so much. Silence uttered too. But uncontrolled openness was something else entirely. I was told very plainly that during spiritual activity, especially prayer or worship, an open mouth without intention represented understanding, spiritual alertness, unguarded access, not possession, not some dramatic takeover, but influence, attachment, interference. Think of it like static entering a signal, still goes up, but it doesn't go up clean. Demons don't need full control to be effective. They just need to distract, delay, or distort. A yawn during prayer often coincided with wandering thoughts, sudden tiredness, or intrusive images, and those weren't random. They were invitations that hadn't been recognized as such. What shocked me most was how patient spirits were. They didn't rush, they waited. If someone yawned once, nothing happened. If it became habitual, if prayer always came with spiritual drowsiness, that was when influence deepened, not ownership. Influence, and influence is enough to weaken prayer. One of the biggest lies Christians believe is that sudden tiredness during prayer is purely physical. Yes, bodies get tired, but not every yawn is about Jesus' instruction, watch and pray, sleep. Some are about resistance. Prayer stirs the spirit, and the spirit realm responds. Sometimes the response is pressure, and pressure often manifests as heaviness in the body. I saw this pattern again and again. People could be wide awake watching television, scrolling on their phones, laughing, engaging. But the moment they bowed their heads, fatigue hit like a wave, eyes got heavy, jaws stretched, focus slipped, and everyone brushed it off as normal. It wasn't normal where I came from. It was expected. Spirits don't attack prayer by force when they can use comfort. Drowsiness is comfortable. It feels harmless. It feels human, and that's why it works. A sleepy Christian is not a silent Christian, but they are often an unfocused one. When I finally learned to pray as a believer, I noticed the same resistance hit me, the same heaviness, the same yawns. That's when I knew this wasn't superstition. It was strategy. After I practical ways to stay focused during prayer, gave my life to Christ, I thought everything from my past would just disappear. But some knowledge doesn't leave, it gets redeemed. And this was one of those things. Dave, first time I yawned during prayer as a Christian, I froze. Not in fear, but in awareness. I remembered the rooms, the instructions, the laughter, and I did something different. I closed my mouth. I straightened my posture. I spoke the name of Jesus out loud, not dramatically, firmly, and the heaviness lifted almost instantly. That moment changed how I approached prayer forever. I stopped praying casually. I stopped praying slouched. I stopped treating prayer like a background activity, because prayer is not background noise in the spirit realm. It's frontline communication. I'm not saying God stops listening when you're young. God is gracious. God hears the heart. But the enemy listens too. And where God shows grace, the enemy looks for gaps. Let me be clear here, because fear is not the goal. Awareness is. You don't need to panic every time you yawn. You do not need obsession. You need intention. Prayer should be awake, engaged, and fully present. Why awareness defeats darkness. Jesus told his disciples to watch and pray, not to drift or speak without awareness. If tiredness comes during prayer, change your position. Stand, move if necessary, pray aloud, be deliberate with your breathing. If a yawn appears, cover our mouth and refocus right away. Simple actions carry spiritual significance when done consciously. Darkness is not threatened by noise or drama, but by awareness. Many churches avoid teaching this because it can sound unusual or be misunderstood, and because spiritual mechanics are often uncomfortable to discuss. But lack of teaching does not make something untrue. I'm sharing this because I once stood on the other side of what you cannot see. I witnessed how small details were used, how ordinary behaviors became points of entry, and how prayer was always the main target of disruption. If this message makes you uncomfortable, it is not meant to accuse you. It is final encouragement and motivation, meant to reveal, and revelation is how freedom begins. I did not leave darkness to remain silent. I left to caution others, not to draw attention to myself, but to offer protection. Prayer carries power, which is why it faces resistance. Your mouth releases life. Be mindful of it. Your breath holds authority. Use it with intention. Your level of focus shapes the strength and clarity of your prayers. If you have noticed unusual interruptions while praying, sudden heaviness, wandering thoughts, or unexplained tiredness, do not brush it aside. At the same time, do not be afraid. Acknowledge it. Call on the name of Jesus. Remain aware. Remain engaged. Darkness is not threatened by believers who pray casually or without consistency.